coming up.
And we have...
My question is related to the full period of time, because the Auditor General only did a sample of that period of 226 of over 400 transactions. I would hope that you are looking at that would have piqued your curiosity as a board member with your fiduciary responsibility to ensure that all of those files and all of those applications of conflicted companies were being eliminated at this stage from consideration out of the 400, not just the ones the Auditor General named.
When the whistleblower appeared before this committee 2 weeks ago, he said that it was more than a possibility. He said that with respect to the reinforced contribution agreement, that it, quote, goes back and retroactively allows for the majority of those ineligible projects to be considered eligible, a majority of ineligible projects. That seems to me to be concerning. And the board at SDTC are changing the rules retroactively to invalidate mismanagement and corruption.
So you're sharing information. Are they providing an oversight and monitoring of projects that you are about to fund? Have they weighed in? Have they made an assessment about the appropriateness of that funding?
Have you stopped that? That seems to me not to be the mandate that Parliament gave the Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Doyle, I take it from your testimony that not 1 cent of money that improperly went out the door at the Green Slush Fund has been recovered in the 4 months that the interim board has been in place. Is that correct?
4 months into the job, despite clear evidence from the Ethics Commissioner about violations under the Conflict of Interest Act, with a defined number of money that was improperly dispersed to the former chair, Annette Vercheron. That is evidence. That is conclusive evidence. And I guess what I'm hearing from you is it's not a priority. It's not a priority for you. It's not a priority for the board. Certainly not a priority for this government. So what are you saying to taxpayers?
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I respect my colleague, Mr. Brock, but he's putting words into the witness' mouth.
The non-disclosure agreements which current and former employees have been required to sign. Is this something that you would be willing to withdraw those NDAs and allow all current and past employees to speak freely? Is that something you as a board member would be willing to undertake?
Like and subscribe.
I want to begin by acknowledging with respect that I am joining you today from my home in Coast Salish territory, specifically on the traditional lands of the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. I am appearing before your committee today as a recently appointed member of the Board of Directors of STTC.
Thank you, Ms. Doyle, for coming on this ongoing study into SDTC, as the public knows it, the $1 billion Liberal Green Slush Fund. So I'd like to start with a couple of basic questions, if I could, and thank you for your opening statement. You've just started to go through the process, or you're about to publish the first money or restart the funding. You mentioned the contribution agreement has been revised. Could you please table with this committee the revised contribution agreement and the one that it replaced?
Yes, we'd be happy to do that. Thanks.
Thank you. The questions I have begin with the issue of the money you're about to give. You outlined that the longest that have been waiting in the queue is sort of how you're going to do the priority. Could I ask you, in that analysis, are you determining whether or not they are any one of the companies of the 82% of transactions that the Auditor General reviewed that were conflicted? And keeping in mind that that is an issue for Parliament, that are you taking that as a factor about whether or not they should be moved up the queue or considered as the investigation is ongoing?
Thank you for that question. I'm getting a kind of a feedback from the room there. I should say that
actually,
first.
Ms. Doyle, just hold on. Maybe we'll try to. I've stopped the clock here. You'll get a chance. So, is that better? Are you still picking up some audio feedback?
No, it's more when I speak.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you proceed if you find that it is very disruptive?
I will.
And similarly for the interpreters, if you pick it up as well. So, Ms. Doyle, the floor is yours, please.
Great. Thank you. I wanted to respond by saying that our very first priority for disbursements to our recipients are those companies that were found to have no conflict of interest or eligibility issues by the Auditor General. And so those will be the very first disbursements, but we are reviewing each project and going through this new disbursement assurance quality process before any payment will be made.
Here, so out of that period, there were 226 transactions the Auditor General reviewed, but that period had over 400 transactions. Have you reviewed the other 400 transactions for the conflicts and also eliminated them from the application process at this stage?
As I mentioned, one recommendation of the Auditor General that is still underway is the assessment of each project as she recommended. And so that work is being undertaken by third parties, and that work is underway right now. And we have...
My question is related to the full period of time, because the Auditor General only did a sample of that period of 226 of over 400 transactions. I would hope that you are looking at that would have piqued your curiosity as a board member with your fiduciary responsibility to ensure that all of those files and all of those applications of conflicted companies were being eliminated at this stage from consideration out of the 400, not just the ones the Auditor General named.
The recommendation of the Auditor General was to assess all projects within her audit period for eligibility. And that is the process that we have underway right now using third parties, is that every single project is being reviewed by 2 independent third parties to assess full eligibility.
Who those 2 independent third parties are?
They're consulting companies that we've recruited through an RFP. I can provide you with the names of those consulting companies.
Yes, if you could, because we've had accusations from the whistleblower that the third parties that have been used to vet projects before have been conflicted with management.
We do have a reinforced conflict of interest provisions that to ensure that our contractors are not in any way in conflict of interest, sir.
Have you met with the minister since you took over this role?
I have not.
Have any of the board members that you're aware of?
No, not that I'm aware of. I believe none of us have met with.
Have you met with and you've met with the president of the NRC in planning the transition?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Prior to the freeze, SDTC published a regular update of every project since its inception that was funded on a spreadsheet that you could download from their website. When you restart funding, will you continue this practice?
I'm sorry, because I'm so recent in this role, I'm not familiar with that practice, but it sounds like the very kind of transparency that we're committed to. So yes, we could do the very same thing, yeah.
Okay. Who is the acting president of SDTC currently?
We do not have an acting president, sir. We have an acting chief operating officer.
And who is that?
That is
Zaid Rahim?
Zaid Rahim, yes.
And is Zaid Rahim operating full-time in that job right now?
Yes, he is operating full-time. Yes.
Okay, because we've been trying to get him to appear before this committee, and he has been saying he's sick and can't appear. So that's good to know. We will make another attempt to have him appear.
Sir, if I could just correct myself, he is on a medical leave.
So who is
Right now.
So who's doing the job?
So our CFO, Cheryl, pardon me, I just have to get Cheryl's
So your
last name.
CFO is the acting operating?
Yes, this
And,
is the acting COO.
okay, who's acting then in Mr. Rahim's role of VP of Investments?
I'm sorry, I don't have the list of staff in front of me. Brian Scott
Brian.
is the acting
Okay,
is the acting VP of Investments.
I'll come back to that in another round.
Thank you very much. Up next, Ms. Khalid.
Ms. Doyle, can I just ask, just as a start, how long have you been in this role?
It's just over 4 months. We were appointed on June 4th, 2024.
And when did you first apply for this role?
I actually did not apply. I was contacted by an executive of ISED to ask if I'd have my name stand to be appointed to this board.
And why did you
for
accept this position?
I accepted the position because I'm very familiar with SDTC in my former roles, and I believe in its mission. And I also felt that I could make a contribution.
Speaking to now a point that you raised, which I was happy to hear, which was your focus on recommendation of the Auditor General 6.29, which largely deals with recovery. This is something that we're aligned with, actually, Ms. Doyle. It's something that I'm very passionate about, is trying to ensure that any instance where there was a conflict of interest or potential mismanagement at the board level that would have resulted in any funding agreement with potentially ineligible projects should be recovered. The Canadian taxpayer should get that money back for any illegitimate projects that were deemed acceptable at that time. There was an organization that we had brought in at one point that was members of the Project Review Committee, which I'm sure you're familiar with, is a function of STDC that helped to review some of this information. They had claimed at that point that, well, at least the Auditor General in her report suggests that this quasi-approval board, at least in the partial acceptance of 6.29, was the reason why some projects were deemed ineligible. This is something that I find largely unacceptable. Do you believe we should recover funds for ineligible projects, as I do?
I believe that where we find any evidence of wrongdoing, and we will, as a board, take action to recover those funds.
Thank you very much, Mr. Very much. Beginning the second round, Mr. Cooper, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Doyle, just to clarify an answer you provided to a question posed by Mr. Perkins, the reassessment process that is now underway is taking into account all of the projects that were reviewed during the time period of the Auditor General's report, not just the sample of the Auditor General. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Can you provide the assurance that once the reassessment process is completed, that no companies that were involved in conflicts of interest involving board members will receive a further cent from the taxpayer through SDTC?
As I mentioned, we are implementing the Auditor General's recommendation, and we're reviewing every single project on an individual basis. And if we find any evidence of wrongdoing on the part of the recipient, as the legal agreements exist between SDTC and the recipients, then the board will take action on recovery.
And take action on recovery and bar such companies from receiving further funding?
Yes, I would imagine that if there was any finding of wrongdoing, that would disqualify them from future agreements with SDTC.
Now, you spoke about a reinforced contribution agreement that is now in place. Pursuant to that reinforced contribution agreement, are there any projects that would now be eligible for funding that were ineligible under the previous contribution agreements but had nonetheless been approved by the former corrupt SDTC board?
That might be the case. You know, the Act and the contribution agreement had not kept pace with changes in the technology space that we are focused on in clean tech. So there is a possibility with the new contribution agreement that, it was recommended by the Auditor General that we clarify language around eligibility. That I would say is a possibility.
I apologize to interrupt you, Ms. Doyle, and I thank you for that, but I raise it because when the whistleblower appeared before this committee 2 weeks ago, he said that it was more than a possibility. He said that with respect to the reinforced contribution agreement, that it, quote, goes back and retroactively allows for the majority of those ineligible projects to be considered eligible, a majority of ineligible projects. That seems to me to be concerning. It seems to me to be concerning that we have $58 million of money that improperly went out the door, according to the Auditor General, and instead of cleaning up the corruption and mismanagement at STTC, what is now in fact happening pursuant to the so-called reinforced contribution agreement is that the minister and ICID and the board at STTC are changing the rules retroactively to invalidate mismanagement and corruption.
Right now, the process is underway to assess the eligibility, so I'm not sure how anyone could speak as the outcome of that process. But I can just give you one example that in the new contribution agreement, we now have much more clear definitions around the technology readiness levels. They hadn't been as clearly defined in the former contribution agreement, and that had posed a challenge around the Auditor General's review of what readiness level was a particular project when it came to its eligibility. So, in some cases, the language is now much clearer, with clearer definitions of what we mean by the TRLs, as they refer to, technology readiness levels.
Thank you. I'll move on to our next member. Ms. Yip, you have the floor.
You mentioned an action plan. How is that progressing? And what are some of the actions in the plan?
Yes, the action plan is now the action plan. We did table it here in June at this committee, and it is now, as I mentioned, except for the very large recommendation around the reassessment of eligibility of all the projects during the audit period, all the other recommendations have now been implemented, and it speaks to just really enhanced diligence, enhanced reporting, strengthened documentation. There's really quite a significant number of improvements that have been made to implement those recommendations.
Turning now to Mr. Brock, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Ms. Doyle. Thank you for your attendance. Minister Champagne on June the 4th, 2024, issued a press release, and I'm going to quote from that release. He said, effective immediately, SDTC will also resume funding under a reinforced contribution agreement with ICID for eligible projects in a sector vital to our country's economy and clean growth transition. In line with the Auditor General's findings, my department will enhance oversight and monitoring of funding during the transition period. Now, did I hear you correctly in stating that since your appointment in and around June of this year, you have not funded any projects as of date?
We were appointed the very same day as that press release.
There's been no funding since that date?
No, there has been no disbursements made because there needed to be certain recommendations of the Auditor General.
Yeah, thank you.
Implemented, yeah.
That's fine, ma'am. You confirmed on a number of occasions you have yet to speak to Minister Champagne, correct?
That's correct.
Have you spoke to the Deputy Minister?
Yes, we've had a discussion with the Deputy Minister, and we have other members of the ISID executive who attend each of our board meetings for a period of time for exchange of information and updates.
Okay. So you're sharing information. Are they providing an oversight and monitoring of projects that you are about to fund? Have they weighed in? Have they made an assessment about the appropriateness of that funding?
We have a regular reporting to ISID, and it's under the new contribution agreement. And financial reporting is going back and forth between ISID and STTC. When it comes to the actual eligibility of the projects, that is our responsibility as the board. And so we've put this process in place, which I've referred to a number of times now.
Who are you talking to at ISID besides the Deputy Minister?
We are speaking with the Assistant Deputy Minister and members of his team, I believe, yes.
Supply this committee with all those names?
Yes, we could.
You mentioned you're reporting to ISID. Do you know specifically who you are reporting to?
We report in, and I mean, we don't, as a board, report. We're appointed by the minister and serve at the pleasure of the government, but we report. Our reporting goes in to the deputy minister. Yeah.
Part of the difficulty in the previous rendition of the board of SDTC was information that we learned that the assistant deputy minister of ISED actually sat in on each and every board meeting, had his eyes and ears on all the funding that was conflicted, all the funding that went to Liberal insiders, and whether or not that was passed on up the chain to Minister Champagne still to this day remains a mystery, hence the scandal. You obviously have had a number of board meetings, smaller in nature, since your appointment. Has the Assistant Deputy Minister sat in on those meetings?
The new contribution agreement specifies exactly the nature of the connection between the board and ISID. A member of an assistant deputy minister or his or her representative attends one portion of the board for the strict purpose of exchange of updates and then leaves the board, so they are not present during any of our board business.
How on earth does that enhance oversight when that particular assistant deputy minister merely receives an update and is not privy to ensuring that all the actions and all the decisions you are making are in accordance with the updated contribution agreement? That was the whole purpose behind the old contribution agreement, that there would be some degree of oversight.
Thank you, Mr. Brock.
Am I hearing there's no oversight?
Mr. Doyle, you have the floor, please.
Yeah. The oversight is very well documented now in the new contribution agreement, and it is through a series of reporting, but as an independent agency, as specified under the Act, that the oversight is not done by having a member of the ISED as sitting in on the board, but rather through the regular reporting, both financial and program reporting, to the department.
I've noticed that you've obviously have extensive experience both serving in government and outside of government. I noticed that you were deputy minister from at Natural Resources. I think you mentioned that from 2006 to 2010. Just with regards to the contribution agreement and just in general, with your experience serving in government, when we talk about oversight, ISED's interest is whether or not the board is respecting the contribution agreement that you have signed, but not necessarily getting involved in the minutiae and day-to-day operations. Is that correct?
Yes, I'd say that's correct.
Okay, because I was just I was worried because I do have lots of organizations back home who have signed various different contribution agreements with various departments, and they would be quite concerned if the minister or political staff or the deputy minister was involved in their day-to-day operations. Obviously, there are reporting mechanisms. It doesn't mean that there is no oversight. It just means that the contribution agreement that you have signed with the said department, whether or not you are respecting that legal entente, if I can say that, with that said department, correct?
Yes, I think that is the essence of the contribution agreement, is to ensure accountability to the government. Yeah.
Okay, and if you're not respecting that, obviously the department has to step in and say, hey, you said you were going to spend X, Y, Z on the particular mandate of the program or the funding agreement that we have signed, and you're not respecting that. Therefore, we will not repay you or not allow you to declare those particular expenses with our department. But I want to move on from that. Your mandate, the board's mandate, you said you're 3 board members. You have... What's the mandate of the board actually? Like 3. I know you've mentioned that you're currently looking at through a third party looking at current contribution agreements with those companies that were funded. But what else do you have to do within the mandate of that particular the new board?
The new board. The minister gave us a very defined mandate. It's 3 and an appointment of 1 year, which is unusual in its brevity. So our mandate is to implement the Auditor General's report, to restart funding, which had been put on pause, and thirdly, to ensure an orderly transition of the organization into the National Research Council.
Okay.
That's our mandate.
Okay, and obviously there's been some concerns with conflict of interest, and I want to dive into that. The new contribution agreement that you've signed with ISED, how does it differ from the previous one with regards to conflict of interest? Because I know we talk about real, perceived, or potential conflicts of interest, and how are you as a board managing that?
Well, it has been a fair amount of work on a new conflict of interest code within SDTC. We as a board receive monthly reports of any declaration of conflict of interest. We also, ISED, under the new contribution agreement, also receives regular reporting of any declaration of conflict of interest. There has been the appointment of a new ethics advisor at STTC, and there has been training, quite extensive training that's been implemented. So I'd say there's been a much more robust conflict of interest regime in place. And that applies not only to staff, but also to contractors, anyone doing work for the foundation.
And then some of my colleagues asked about your appointment, June 2024. There was a press release. 3 board members were appointed. You've talked about a third party being involved in terms of reviewing the current contribution agreements that are currently in place. When was that RFP given to that third party? Or when was that announced, the award of the third party for review? And I'm just trying to determine whether it's long.
It was one of the AG's recommendation. It took us about 6 weeks, I think, and so it was sometime, I would say, in late July that the independent consultants were retained. Yeah.
Okay, and is there an end time particular to that, to the fact that they need to complete all of the reviews that were listed in the particular RFP? Or is this get to the bottom of this and take as long as you want?
No, we do have our end time that we made a commitment in the action plan that the action plan to implement is the end of December 2024.
Thank you.
Is to have all of that review complete.
Thank you very much, Mr. Doyle. Beginning our third round, Mr. Perkins, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to ask the witness, if I could, the SDTC had created something called accelerators. Are those companies that were accelerators, project reviews, still in place?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that question. No new applications will be considered under, and the accelerators came under a stream called the ecosystem funding stream. And so one decision the board has taken is to cease funding of the accelerators or under the ecosystem and to not accept any further applications.
So I'm going to go through a scenario, and I appreciate hearing that, to make sure that you're eliminating this from the whole process. Because former chair of SDTC, Annette Vercheron, came to that stream for the Vercheron Center seeking a total of $6.8 million for the Vercheron Center, which was one of those accelerators, which she established at Cape Breton University. That got to the investment committee, which your now acting chief operating officer was involved in, and we have emails from him in his role as VP of investments, which said, obviously that the conflict was even too much for that group to accept, and it was rejected, but committed an email that SDT staff would help find the Vercheron Center money elsewhere. So the result of that is that on June 9th, 2022, ACOA granted $2 million to the Vercheron Center, and I said another $2.5 million. And then in September of 2023, while ISED was investigating SDTC, their regional development agency, ACOA, gave yet another $1 million. And then on September 19th, 2023, the industry department gave them another $3.1 million. So that's a total of almost $9 million of taxpayer money that went, that the whistleblower said staff were involved in trying to find funding for that center elsewhere. And they confirmed that that was a common practice, that staff were tasked with finding other money for these sometimes rejected and sometimes accepted projects in other government departments. Have you stopped the practice of staff being the government relations and slush fund management of the Government of Canada for either rejected or accepted projects on that? It is not SDTC's role to act as the in-house application process for other government departments, is it?
As I've mentioned, Mr. Chair, we have a very particular mandate, and that mandate is to, as I said, go through those three things. But we have, as I mentioned, the ecosystem funding stream has been discontinued, and so
have you curtailed the process of staff acting on behalf of companies that apply to find money in other government departments? And you were a deputy minister in other government departments. So have you stopped that? That seems to me not to be the mandate that Parliament gave the foundation.
I'm not familiar with any practice like that being undertaken.
Well, it means it hasn't stopped then. I'll move to my next thing. The order of the House of Commons was that unredacted documents during that audit period be turned over to the law clerk of the House of Commons. And SDTC, as I understand it, has not fully complied with that. In fact, put in redacted documents. And the Speaker ruled a point of privilege against the House, which we're debating as we speak in the House. Are you, as a board member, ensuring that you comply with the order of the House of Commons to put unredacted documents into the law clerk?
We had directed, and I'm quite certain that it was implemented, that all thousands and thousands of unredacted documents were provided to the law clerk. None of the documents that were provided by SDTC were redacted.
But the full order, according to the law clerk, has not been complied with because not all the documents have come yet.
Well, the
That's in a
documents
letter
that were
from the law clerk to the speaker.
Our own obligations, I believe, have been fulfilled. At STTC, there were a number of other agencies that were involved. In fact, I think almost every part of the government was covered by that request.
Thank you very much.
One of the challenges here is there was a conflict of interest mess in terms of procedures being followed, but a lot of that seemed to hinge based upon what I've been able to glean from the evidence, and the record is a lot hinged on particular lawyers' involvement in advice. And I just want to be clear, the lawyer who was offering that advice at the time, is he still involved in any way with the organization?
No, he's not in any way involved anymore, no.
And is anyone involved? So in terms of the concerns that have been raised, the biggest concern from, again, what I've been able to see is, I know there's a lot of grandstanding and political theater to this, but there was a bundled approval of COVID payments to COVID-related payments, emergency payments to a series of companies that had been previously approved for funding, and there was a bundled approval, and again, the lawyer suggested that a recusal was not necessary. I think that was incorrect advice in the language of the ethics commissioner. Anyone involved in that approval process at the time, is anyone still involved in the board?
You know, my understanding is that the main person involved in that was the CEO, and she, as you know, is gone. And the lawyer himself is no longer providing advice at all.
So anyone who is subject to any concerning conflict or any allegation of conflicts, they're no longer involved.
Yeah, that's my understanding, yep.
Turning now to Mr. Cooper, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Doyle, I take it from your testimony that not 1 cent of money that improperly went out the door at the Green Slush Fund has been recovered in the 4 months that the interim board has been in place. Is that correct?
We have a process in place to review every single project on an individual basis.
I understand you have a process in place. You've explained that, and my question is just to confirm that at present not 1 cent has actually been recovered.
Now, there's a process underway now.
Thank you. So not 1 cent has been recovered. Thank you for that. And the process that I presume you're alluding to are the consulting firms that are undertaking reassessments. Is that the process?
Yes, that's the process as recommended by the Auditor General.
And I want to just be clear in understanding what is being done through these independent consulting firms and the review that is taking place as to who's eligible and who won't be eligible. You noted more than once that the projects that will be down on the list and will be flagged and where there is wrongdoing will not be eligible are those where the Auditor General identified, for instance, conflicts of interest. Is that correct?
Well, the process underway is reassessing every project around its eligibility.
Maybe just to help you answer, the Auditor General went through 226 of 420 projects. Of the 226 projects reviewed by the Auditor General identified 186 conflicts of interest. Based upon the sample that the Auditor General took, in which the Auditor General found 82% of projects involved conflicts of interest, when you look at the balance of projects, there could be somewhere in the neighborhood of anywhere from 180 to 200 additional conflicts of interest that involved former Green Slush Fund board members. That's a lot of conflicts. That's a lot of wrongdoing to examine. And I just am wondering exactly what is being done and what assurance can you provide that those conflicts, that wrongdoing, is being captured? Because count me skeptical if you're telling me that some third-party consultants are coming in and are doing that work in a sufficient way.
I can assure you that the process is well underway. We're using a number of different consultancies so that we can get this work done in an accelerated fashion, and that should and where there's any instance after each review of wrongdoing, we will take action.
Of one instance, and that is the $220,000 that was improperly funneled into Annette Vercheron's company. She moved two motions to funnel $220,000 into a company in which she was the CEO, sole shareholder, and sole director, or majority shareholder, sole director. She has been found guilty of violating multiple sections of the Conflict of Interest Act. So there is a black and white case of wrongdoing that has been identified by the Auditor General. Has your process been initiated to recover those funds now that the Ethics Commissioner has issued a report?
That is one of the projects that is under review now. That process is...
What is there to review? What is there to review? She has been found guilty by the Ethics Commissioner, so why is it, in the face of that, that the SDTC board is not immediately, through its process, taking steps to recover those funds that improperly went out the door and in a blatant conflict of interest?
Yes, and I understand that she was also the subject of a conflict of interest in Ethics Commissioner's report.
Thank you very much.
So for clarification, can you clarify how many different third-party consultants are doing these reviews in order to expedite the process?
I believe there are 3 consultancies that have been retained.
Okay, and the aim is to have these completed by the end of December this year. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Beginning our fourth and final round, Mr. Brock, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to follow up on a couple of loose threads that from questioning of my colleagues, starting with Madame Sinclair I'm going to mispronounce her name, Desgagnés. She asked you whether or not you're in a position to apologize for the mischaracterization of the whistleblower who blew the lid open on this scandal. And I believe your response was simply, that was in the past, I'm part of a new board. So you, as representing the board, governing under SDTC, you are not taking a position to apologize for the state of affairs at this particular corporation. Is that what I'm hearing?
You know, we were brought in to provide strong governance and executive oversight to SDTC. I wasn't in the organization at the time that this witness number 1
sorry to interrupt,
was working there.
No one has accepted responsibility. No one has apologized for this boondoggle that the assistant deputy minister called on a secret tape that this was a sponsorship-like scandal, the likes that this country has not seen since the demise of the Chrétien-Martin government. We're talking almost $1 billion of taxpayer funds that went out the door that should not have. So if you're not prepared to apologize, I'll keep that on record that you're not prepared to do that because you're part of a new board. Now, my colleague, Mr. Cooper, also asked you a question regarding recovery. And I know you have a mandate with respect to recovery, but what I'm hearing is, despite being 4 months into the job, despite clear evidence from the Ethics Commissioner about violations under the Conflict of Interest Act, with a defined number of money that was improperly dispersed to the former chair, Annette Vercheron, that is evidence. That is conclusive evidence. And I guess what I'm hearing from you is it's not a priority. It's not a priority for you. It's not a priority for the board. Certainly not a priority for this government. So what are you saying to taxpayers?
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I respect my colleague, Mr. Brock, but he's putting words into the witness' mouth without even providing any evidence to this committee. The witness has answered to me that there are investigations currently going on. So I love to follow the evidence, but when we're opining, this is where I question the auditor's ability on the other side to actually get to the bottom of this and find the truth.
The witness can add, and while you might find the questions, Mr. Brock, I've stopped the clock. That is not a point of order. You might be irritated with the style and the question, but it is Mr. Brock's time, and the witness is
Why don't you stop interrupting so
gentlemen,
I can ask
and the witness is here to answer questions. Mr. Brock, you have the floor again, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I apologize, ma'am, for the interruptions from the Liberal bench, but they don't like hearing tough questions. I want you to address Canadians, because there are hundreds of thousands of Canadians who are following the scandal, following my social media posts, my colleagues' social media posts about this scandal. What are you saying to Canadians about your priority in terms of ensuring money is paid back? What is the plan?
The plan is to implement the findings of the Auditor General's report of June 2024, and we are well advanced in that work. And that every recommendation has been implemented now except one, and that is we are now reviewing every single project on an individual basis as per her recommendation. And where there is any...
Are you completely disregarding the findings of the Ethics Commissioner, who made a finding of 2 violations under the Conflict of Interest Act with a defined amount? Why is it not a priority for your board, working with the ministry, to recover those funds from Annette Vercheron? Why aren't you doing that?
We are in a process right now.
Doesn't say anything. Process is government speak for take our word for it. We are going to make this a priority when we get to it. You've had 4 months to do something about it. This is a priority for Canadians. It's not a priority to continue the funding. The priority is to get the money back, almost $1 billion of taxpayer funds. That's just not being recovered. No process to recover that. That's a real significant problem. Now, you also mentioned that you complied with the disclosure requests from this committee. Who gave you direction from the ministry to supply all the information as requested?
We received the direction from the law clerk directly to SDTC.
And did I hear directly from you that you complied with each and every request from the law clerk and these documents were unredacted?
Yes, you heard that correctly.
Okay. And when was it delivered to the law clerk?
It because of the thousands and thousands and thousands of documents that were requested, pretty well every document that's been produced in the organization the last 20 years, it was produced and delivered in tranches. And so every 2 or 3 every 2 or 3 weeks, another, 13,000 documents were provided. They were provided over the course of the summer and into, I believe we completed, and I can get you, I don't have the dates in front of me, sir, but we have complied with the request.
Thank you. My last question, when was the last tranche delivered?
I'm now just guessing because I don't have that just on the top of my head, and I would say it was in early September.
Thank you.
Just wondering, there's been some mentions about, it's no news to anybody that the ethics commissioner has ruled on 2 cases specifically. But if we are to recover any monies, I'm just wondering, what would be the legal risk of you just starting to send letters to those particular companies that may or may not have, because I don't know, I'm still waiting to see the reviews, but that may or may not have done any wrongdoing? What would those companies potentially put the government of Canada, what would be the legal risk?
We have received legal advice and on the whole question of recovery. And, the project agreements that we enter into with the recipient companies are legal documents. They're binding documents. So there needs to be, a violation of some aspect of that document for us to recover any funds. But we have been forthright in receiving advice on that. I think one of the risks with some of the very small companies is that to go after them and to recover them might actually cost more money from a legal perspective than is actually bears any fruit for the crown, so to speak. But we are receiving advice on that right now.
But I'm assuming that the legal advice you're receiving is, let's make sure we get all our ducks in a row. Let's make sure the third-party review is completed before we make any conclusions, as my honourable colleague on the other side is making with all the companies, because they're not mentioning any companies. They're just saying everything's been, and they're opining on this stuff. But I do want to get to the bottom of this, get the truth. But in order to get the truth, we have to let the investigation or the process, as the other side seems to be against the process or against the recommendations of the Auditor General now, that I understand, we have to let this particular process do its course.
Yes, that's correct.
I want to start off with a bit of a request. Would you be willing to share with this committee copies of the minutes of all board meetings and investment committee meetings for the audit period from March 1st, 2019, right up to today? Is that something you could provide this committee with?
Yes, and I understand that those have already been provided under the production of papers request, like all of the minutes, because we're going back now to 2017, sir. But
just to interrupt, thank you. But I'm asking directly to this committee, not
directly
to this committee.
Yeah, to this committee.
Commit to do that within a reasonable time period, which the chair and the clerk could work that out. A second thing I wanted to follow up on. It's been mentioned a few times, the non-disclosure agreements, which current and former employees have been required to sign. Is this something that you would be willing to withdraw those NDAs and allow all current and past employees to speak freely? Is that something you as a board member would be willing to undertake?
We have a very specific mandate that's been provided to us as kind of on this transitionary period. So I would take that under advisement. I can't make any commitment on that right now, and I'm not sure that it is appropriate. Some of those NDAs were entered into because of a particular severance on the departure of employees from SDTC. That's my understanding in the past. So I think I would have to open up the whole thing, but I can't make that undertaking right now.
So I will leave that point for now, but I do know we have other directors who are coming, and I think this is an issue that you as a board member will have to deal with, and I think it is something that would be in the interest of transparency, that those who have been eager to speak but unable to do so because of these NDAs which SDTC have placed on them have been unable to do so. So I will come back to that, but I think you should be strongly considering that. I want to move on quickly to this review of the projects that's being undertaken. In response to a question from Ms. Bradford, you did say that you would provide this committee with that information, but then you made a bit of a caveat, subject to certain commercial confidentiality. Now, you have served as a deputy minister of a federal department, so you, I'm sure, are aware that committees can request any information without limitations. You are aware of that, right?
Yes, I think I do recall that. Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify because whenever there, I hear stipulations being placed on subject to this, subject to that, the power of committees to send for documents is without restriction, and so I did want to clarify that. So we do look forward to receiving that information when it is finished. Now I've got about a couple minutes left. I want to go back a little bit in time because there's an interesting quirk of history. The last time you appeared before this committee was dealing with another energy and clean energy issue when you were the Deputy Minister of NRCan, dealing with period between 2003 and 2005 when the former Liberal government came under conflict of interest challenges. And that ethics commission, or that's AG report, it was written that before signing the 5 contribution agreements, NRCan knew that a consultant who had provided services to the department relating to the contribution programs would also be working for the organizations that received NRCan funding under these programs. In our view, the AG's view, this is a conflict of interest that NRCan did not identify. Payments totaling about $3.2 million that NRCan made under the contribution agreement with CEEA Transport were not in accordance with the terms and conditions of this agreement. Now, granted, you were not the Deputy Minister at the time that Liberal government was undertaking this program, but you were the Deputy Minister when the audit came out. I'm just looking at these 2 AG reports, looking at these conflicts of interest. Why is it, Ms. Doyle, that SDTC was able to operate under such terrible conflict of interest challenges when we've seen these challenges happening before with the former Liberal government? Why did this happen once again? Liberals back in power, going back to their old ways of allowing these conflict of interests to get back into the play of things. Money going to friends, going to those who are in conflicts of interest. Why did this happen? From your expert view.
Well, let me just say that you've got a very good memory, or somebody who's a good researcher, because that is exactly when the last time I was back in front of this committee. And at the time it was, I can only say that it was in one of the research labs. It was an individual in a research lab that didn't really have any kind of a political affiliation from what I can recall.
Thank you very much. And our final member, Ms. Khalid, you have the floor.
My understanding is that you have appeared during the former Prime Minister Stephen Harper's time, and so I find it quite telling that all the opposition is trying to do is to find ways to link this to a Liberal government, any Liberal government that has been current or in the past. But I do want to talk to you about what the impact of that maligning, that constant questioning, that constant needling into what is democratic institutions and that public trust. So, can you help us understand what the impact of this has been on the industry? After a year of frozen funding at SDTC, what exactly are you hearing from the industry in your 4 months in your position?
Well, I certainly feel that what the industry would like to see is us get back to business and get back to the mission of advancing clean tech innovation in Canada. And the pause has had an impact on individual companies who are, have their work suspended or on pause because of the funding pause. But I think, by and large, there is a feeling that this is a really important sector, and that it is important for SDTC has been an important partner, over the last 20 years in clean tech, and has seen some significant results, successes come out of that. So I do think that the industry is just anxious, whether it be an SDTC or NRC, for Canada to get on with promoting and supporting the evolution of clean tech in this country.
Thank you. And to be clear, the minister, once he identified this entire thing as an issue, took action. And now, as we're going through the transition process, what are what is the outlook for that industry to ensure that we are supporting that industry as we transition to the NRC from the SDTC?
I think that the prospects are fairly strong, and we are. I've learned again, or kind of gotten back into understanding just the strength of the clean tech sector in Canada, and many of our I guess partners and recipients are making real progress in advancing the sustainability of every kind of sector across the country. It's impressive, the diversity of projects that are being funded, from the agricultural sector, transportation, in oil and gas, in consumer, all areas. So I think it is a fairly strong. It's a sector that deserves public investment.
And why is that, do you think?
Well, just to stay competitive globally, like many other countries are investing in their clean tech sectors, and it is, it's not only a question of strengthening the sustainability of it, it's also of the economic prospects. Yes, it's just really, it's really important in terms of the economy of the century.
Realize that you've only been in your role for 4 months, and that's not a very long time. I'm sure you're still trying to catch the ropes. But I do want to know, what is your vision, say, 10 years from now, with respect to how the NRC is going to function, and where you see this industry going, and where it will lead Canada globally?
I have to say that since taking on this role, we've had little opportunity for imagining the future, just because there's a lot of work to be done in implementing the AG's report and the within our mandate. But I do feel optimistic, in what I've learned about the partner companies that STTC is supporting. I feel optimistic around the level of innovation in the sector, and I see it as fairly bright, and I'm sure the NRC will serve it well.
Thank you very much again, Ms. Doyle, for your time today and for your expertise. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Khalid. And thank you, Ms. Doyle, for your testimony and participation in relation to the study. You can send in any of the requested materials to the clerk. If you have any questions, please raise them with the clerk. I will say, I'm just going to make 2 points just to kind of set things off. I know at one point with Madame Desjardins, she'd asked for some documents, and you said you would review that, I think take it under advisement. Where's that effect? If you could let us know. I always encourage as much disclosure as possible. I realize sometimes it can be tricky. I would just remind you that Parliament does have, this committee as well as Parliament does have the ability to call for documents, although we don't go 0 to 60 overnight. Should you feel you cannot provide documents, you could please provide an explanation why that is the case. But again, I would urge you to side on the side, or to fall on the side of transparency and openness. As well, we generally like to have a response back within 3 weeks, please, if that's possible. Sooner, again, is always preferred, but we'll begin to sniff around for the documents within 3 weeks and begin to ask questions. So I appreciate that and just wanted to raise that with you. So again, thank you very much, Ms. Doyle, and I will adjourn the committee. We're out of resources. We'll see you back here Monday. The notice is going out very soon.